Welcome back to the world of ElumTools. The topic of this video is the Materials Mapping feature. ElumTools Materials Mapping is part of the critical setup process you must understand prior to any lighting calculations. The most important ingredients for accurate lighting analysis in ElumTools, or any other software program for that matter, are luminaire position and surface properties. We discuss luminaire position in the Luminaire Manager series of videos. In this video, we will learn how the default surface properties are obtained from the Revit model and how they can be changed to more accurately suit your lighting calculations. With a sample Revit file open, let's first visit the Revit Materials area from the Manage tab. This dialog contains all the materials currently defined in the Revit project. ElumTools does not have access to all of the inner workings of Revit. Only those things that are currently exposed in the 2012 version of the API, the Application Programmers Interface controlled by Autodesk. Let's select a material like Carpet 1. We see that the material has a color as assigned in the Graphics tab. And it also has a rendered appearance, defined in the Appearance tab. Unfortunately, ElumTools has API access only to the information from the Graphics tab. This is a decent starting point if the graphics color and the transparency data are reasonable. ElumTools can calculate an equivalent reflectance from the RGB components of any color. The graphics transparency as a percentage is also easily accessible. So using the materials graphics properties, ElumTools attempts to perform some intelligent mapping of Revit materials to ElumTools materials for the purposes of lighting computations. Let's close the Revit Materials dialog and go to the ElumTools Materials Mapping dialog. Now locate our Carpet 1 sample. It is close to the top of the dialog, as the dialog is sorted by materials in use alphabetically. Revit Materials properties are shown on the left side, and ElumTools materials properties are shown on the right. Looking at Carpet 1, let's move across the dialog from left to right. We first find the Revit graphics color. This is not editable. The Revit graphics transparency, set to 0, which makes sense for carpet, and it is also not editable. The link column, which simply shows that this material is being retrieved from Revit. More on this in a second. The material has been assigned an opaque ElumTools surface type, which makes sense for materials with no transparency. In the ElumTools color column, we find the Revit graphics color. The next two columns contain the computed reflectance and the transmittance values. All of the properties on the ElumTools side can be edited. From the Revit graphics color, a reflectance of 50% has been computed. If this is not what you want to use for the reflectance value for the floor surfaces with this material applied, it should be edited here. This can be done in the reflectance column by simply scrolling the reflectance value if you like, or by clicking the ellipsis button adjacent to the color or reflectance cells. Color, reflectance. This will open the color and reflectance selection dialog. This dialog can be used in a variety of ways. To select a new reflectance for the same hue, in this case we can just select the new reflectance, or we can change hue and assign a different color altogether along with a new calculated reflectance. You can manually enter RGB or HSL values. And we can track recent and favorite colors using the morph layout. When satisfied with the color and reflectance selection, click OK and return to the Material Mapping dialog. Notice the link column has been changed to a red bar. This means the information retrieved from Revit has been changed in ElumTools for the purposes of lighting calculations only. It is not being forced back into Revit. If you wish to transfer the color back to Revit, this can be done by changing the link column to a bidirectional arrow. This would change the graphics color in the Revit Materials dialog. Let's select a different material titled Fabric Mesh and return to the Color and Reflectance dialog again for a moment. Astute observers may have noticed that there is a transmittance setting available in this dialog as well. ElumTools supports translucent transfer of light through a material using a Lambertian or diffuse distribution model. Translucent surfaces can both reflect and transmit light. The amount of light that can be transmitted is dependent on the surface reflectance. The dialog keeps track of the relationship, and you can adjust both as required, as seen here as we experiment with the sliding controls. Exiting the dialog, we see that the transmittance assigned also appears in the transmittance column. We can also see that a translucent surface type has been applied. Now let's look further down the dialog to find several materials titled glass. Notice they are all considered to have transparent surface type. This is done automatically, as ElumTools will search the Revit materials for the word glass and apply a transparent surface type to all positive search results. ElumTools then assigns the Revit Graphics Transparency property to the surface, as well as the Revit Graphics Color to approximate tinted glass. There is no correlation between graphics color and graphics transparency in Revit. However, ElumTools uses the graphics transparency value and then attempts to find a similar color, say blue, that can have a calculated transparency of the same amount. Because tinted materials deprecate light transmittance, you may find that if the Revit graphics color is dark and the transparency high, ElumTools will assign a much lighter shade of a similar hue to the surface, as in the case we examine now. If you prefer to not assign a colored tint to the glass, enter the color dialog through the transmittance ellipsis, select the grayscale hue, and set the transmittance to the appropriate value. Transparent surfaces cannot reflect light in ElumTools, and currently all light passes through using a Lambertian distribution model. Of course, we know the Revit graphics properties are not applicable to real-world materials. Remember, these are simply starting or seeding values for ElumTools. You must edit the material properties on the ElumTools side of the Materials Mapping dialog to prepare for accurate lighting calculations. If you have the need to save materials changes you have made to be used with a similar Revit file utilizing the same materials, ElumTools allows the materials map to be saved. Simply select the Save button in the lower left corner of the dialog and give the map a name. When opening the ElumTools Materials dialog for a different Revit project, you can load the saved map using the Load button. Any materials with the same name will be modified with the properties saved in the map. This concludes the description of the basics of ElumTools Materials Mapping. Be sure and watch our supplemental material video discussing the advanced materials properties of mesh level, color bleed, and luminous surfaces.